So an atrocious ground experience, quite possibly the worst I have ever experienced, which leads to an abbreviated in-flight service which isn't what I paid for, a mediocre dinner served economy style, and then I had to eat half of it in the dark. Absolutely abysmal.
Hi, I'm Matt. Over the last 25 years, I've travelled a lot. I've lived in 5 countries on 4 continents. I've flown over 1.3 million miles. I've visited over 100 countries, every American state, but I'm nowhere near done. So subscribe to the channel so you can come with me. So hello and welcome to the video. One route to YouTube success seems to be to blow the slightest inconvenience you might experience up into a world-ending catastrophe. That's not really my style, so I'll leave it to you to decide whether I'm overreacting by the end of this video. We got to Miami's airport check-in later than expected due to weather, traffic, and there being precisely nobody working in the budget rental car return area. After waiting to be serviced for quite a while, we just had to leave the car there and hope for the best. The first sign that all was not right was the queue, or, as we were in the USA, the line. We were scheduled to take off at 9:30 p.m. and we joined the first class check-in queue at exactly 7 p.m. The timestamps on the videos I took have been quite helpful in preparing this script. My BA Gold card allowed me to avoid the business class queue, and the economy queue was just ridiculous. It became clear that there were 4 desks open to check in an A380. It took 45 minutes for the one agent managing the first class counter to check in the 6 people ahead of us in line, so we were looking at 7.5 minutes per passenger. This was down to the increased documentation checks that were required, although our agent claimed that the computer system was also misbehaving. BA's A380s can carry 469 passengers and it was pretty full, so I would guess that 350 passengers needed to check in. Quite a few would connect to the flight airside, and we'd encounter the problems this created later. So 350 people taking 7.5 minutes each across 4 check-in desks meant that the process was going to take 11 hours. I talked about the Verifly app in my video about the outbound flight in premium economy, but I will repeat here that it worked very well for me and I recommend you take a look. Despite using Verifly, it still took the agent 7 minutes to tag our bags and issue the boarding cards. I won't embarrass her by allowing her to be identified, but she said that her colleagues were still being paid even if they decided to stay at home. Perhaps unsurprisingly, that was an option lots of people were taking, and I'm not sure you can blame them. I never found out whether it was a BA policy, a policy of their ground handling agent, or something from Miami Airport or even the state of Florida, but it should not have been a surprise to BA that they would need to process an A380 full of people that evening. Unacceptable and not a premium experience. The agent recommended that instead of going the normal way through security, we go in the opposite direction to an American Airlines checkpoint in Area D, which had a priority lane. This checkpoint was deserted when we got there, so we were through in minutes, which was very welcome and did allow us to claw back some of the time we had wasted in the BA queue. I'll note that doubling back to that checkpoint adds quite a distance to the walk to the flagship lounge by gate D30 if, like us, that was where you were heading. One World Emerald and Sapphire status gives you access to American Airlines flagship lounges. That's gold or silver in BA lingo. If you're used to the usual domestic US airline lounges, a flagship lounge should come as a pleasant surprise. We were welcomed by a champagne counter, and as it had been a 25-minute walk from the check-in counter on top of the 50 minutes spent checking in, a glass was well received. The lounge was spacious, well appointed, and was pretty quiet at 8:30 that night. A very good drinks offering spread across spirits, beers and wines. A hot and cold food buffet was also offered. Quite ambitious, although my experience that night and on previous visits was that the plates on which the good stuff is served are pretty small and are quickly depleted. There were plenty of charred Brussels sprouts available. I had some glazed short ribs and spuds. The plates you eat from were also pretty small, but this was just a snack as we'd be eating pretty quickly on the plane, right? Just before 9, there was an announcement in the lounge that BA passengers should head to the gate as it was a bit of a hike to get there. The boards were showing our departure had been delayed until 10 p.m, but I thought that was still optimistic, as it had only been about 45 minutes since we'd left 300 people still queuing to check in. I questioned this with the lounge agent, but she was insistent that the crew was at the gate and the plane would be boarding shortly, which turned out to be complete cobblers, but we foolishly believed her, so headed off. You have to walk all the way back to the security area through what I call the corridor of doom to reach the train, which then will take you to the satellite boarding area where A380s are accommodated. They use gates E24 for the lower deck and E25 for the upper deck. And when we descended into the gate lounge area, you could tell all was not well. Firstly, the crew was arriving at the same time as we were, so the lounge agent had been misinformed, let's say. I'm sure American wouldn't have kicked us all out early to save money on their consumables. Secondly, the lounge area looked like a refugee camp, with the 400 or so passengers crammed into a space with perhaps 200 seats. The signage was all over the place too. Obviously the check-in process had accelerated after we left, so all of the seats were taken, and I found a spot on the floor and settled in. Unacceptable and not a premium experience. Communication at the gate was abysmal. A brief apology, but then nothing for 30 minutes. Our advertised departure time had clicked over to 10:30, but by 10:15 there was still no movement. Then there was an announcement that a catering truck had broken, so they couldn't lift anything to the upper deck of the plane. Fair enough, but seconds later, the gate agent read out a list of perhaps 40 passengers who still needed to have their documents checked.
Passenger Wilcox, Willock, Susan and Waiter.
Probably the connecting passengers I mentioned earlier. BA was clearly trying to blame the airport for the delay, but that was quite disingenuous, as we wouldn't have been able to start boarding until all passengers' documents had been checked anyway. 11 p.m. came and went, with the departure time still showing as 10:30. At 11:15 they called for the lower deck to board, as they were still struggling to provision the upper deck. A pragmatic solution, I think, but that created a fair amount of confusion. Then around 11:30 they called the upper deck to board, so 2.5 hours after we'd been kicked out of the lounge and having spent nearly 2 hours sitting on the floor, we boarded. Unacceptable and not a premium experience. Through and onto the upper deck. I had chosen a seat in the forward of the 2 club class mini cabins on the upper deck and had been able to snag the back row, which is the only row where the window seat occupant doesn't have to climb over another passenger's feet to get out of their seat. It's still quite a tight exit with a low ceiling, and you have to get past the trip hazard created by this odd raised section of floor, but it's still the best seat in the cabin. Aisle seats have aisle access, but they are quite exposed. The window seats offer excellent privacy. When this seat was launched in 2000, it was revolutionary, the first flatbed in the sky. It's been widely superseded since, including by BA themselves with their club suites, but it's still a very tolerable way to travel. Normally you're sitting 8 abreast, the club dormitory as I call it, but the fuselage curves in on the upper deck of the A380, so it's only 7 abreast up there. That curvature creates a solution to the seat's biggest drawback, which is storage. Apart from the upstairs window seats, all you get beyond the overhead bins is this pokey little drawer. In the window seats upstairs, you get 3 large storage bins which will gobble up pretty much anything you can throw at them. The seat has a table and a screen with decent but not outstanding size and picture definition. A PowerPoint plus a USB charger, although they are down by the drawer, which may not be hugely convenient. And a footrest which forms part of the flat bed. Mine collapsed when I put any weight on it, which is not how it's supposed to work, and was annoying on the couple of occasions it happened overnight. There was also in-flight Wi-Fi. I never pay for that service, and I don't think BA offered particularly good value, but your opinion may differ. We received a glass of champagne as a PDB, pre-departure beverage, and a refill, although I'd had to tackle a passing crew member and demand one. But finally, at 20 past midnight, just under 3 hours late, we took off. So after all the kerfuffle, did I enjoy the famed BA club class hospitality? Nope. Even though we'd been scheduled for an evening departure, and even though we'd been effectively trapped in the gate lounge area for 3 hours without food or water, we'd taken off after midnight. So BA procedures required the crew to execute an abbreviated service to get things done as quickly as possible to allow passengers to sleep. I could be uncharitable and say that this also allowed the crew to minimise the work they had to do during the flight, but they were a good crew and I think they were just as annoyed by the delay as we were. Passengers weren't surveyed about this decision, so even if 60, 70 or perhaps 80% of the passengers did want a quick service, the 20, 30 or perhaps 40% of passengers who didn't got no say in the matter. They'd taken our dinner order before takeoff. Beef on a plane is always a risk, and after a 4-hour delay that was not a risk I was willing to take, so I went for the cod. And very rapidly after takeoff, in line with their undemocratic decision to serve us all as quickly as possible, a single tray arrived with the entire dinner. I was already grumpy from the delay, and this just made me grumpier, so I sent it back and demanded that they bring me a gin and tonic first. I couldn't delay the inevitable much longer, and a replacement tray swiftly arrived. I then had a fairly lengthy chat with the cabin manager about how annoying I was finding all of this, which meant that the cod had dried out, so he swapped it for what was now my third dish. Even after the swap, it was dry, excessively salty, and was actually quite nasty. And then, halfway through trying to eat it, they turned all the lights off. Even though we were trying to take some time to enjoy the service, they decided that as everyone else had finished, we needed to finish our meals in the dark. All we had was a reading light over our shoulders, but the design of the seat meant that when you leaned forward to address your meal, your body blocked the light. Unacceptable, and not a premium experience. I was beyond annoyed by now and was actually quite upset. Even though this was an Avios redemption using a 2-for-1 Amex voucher, it had still cost me a lot of cash for the taxes and fees you still need to pay, and I felt strongly that I was not receiving the experience I had paid for. Had the flight been scheduled for a post-midnight departure, this approach would have been entirely reasonable. But as we'd had a 3-hour delay and had not had the opportunity to eat or drink anything for almost all of that delay, I don't feel that enforcing this approach on everyone was acceptable. So I was upset, I was frustrated, I was still hungry as the main course was so unpleasant, but I had little choice but to go to sleep. Fortunately, I slept quite well. Even though the seat is a bit narrow, it is pretty long. I'm 6'4", and when the seat was flat, my feet and head did simultaneously touch the sides, but it was still pretty comfortable. For taller passengers, the design means your feet aren't crammed into a cubby under the seat in front, as happens with most business class designs, which I actually quite like. The bedding was a bit odd. This undersheet is intended to offer padding against the joiny bits of the seat's design, but it was so thin it had no real effect. The blanket/duvet was pretty large, and it also wasn't too thick, which can be an issue as the cabins are often kept quite warm. I got around 5 hours of pretty decent sleep. It was lights on around 1 hour and 40 minutes from landing, which once again was probably what operating standards dictated, but it felt a bit too long. And then they served breakfast, which was pitiful. I would have been complaining had I received this in an economy cabin, but in business this is outrageous. A dried out wrap with a scraping of filling, a teaspoon of yoghurt and a dust bar. Unacceptable and not a premium experience. Before going to sleep, I'd asked to speak to the cabin service director, as I know they can pre-lodge a complaint via their iPads. I don't like to formally complain about something without making my unhappiness known during the experience that I then complain about. About 30 minutes before landing, they'd not shown up, so I asked again, and a cabin service manager came to speak to me. I never found out whether there was a director on board. She was lovely, she was sympathetic, and was very apologetic. Apparently the ground team only had 5 people report for work that day, and the catering team was also down on staff. The truck did indeed break down, and the plane had also been late arriving. She agreed that the breakfast offering was unacceptable for business class, but there was nothing that she could have done about forcing us to eat in the dark. That's the operational process BA has mandated. She promised to lodge my complaint, along with others from quite a few other passengers, but perhaps unsurprisingly, I've heard nothing from BA, and it's now 6 days since the flight. Looks like I'm going to have to also complain directly. This video will form part of my complaint. We made up about 40 minutes of the delay in flight, so a 2 hours 10 minutes late landing. My 3 transits of UK immigration in the last 2 months have now taken 1, 2 and 1 minutes, so don't believe the hype that there are always delays at the border. And if you have to do a day 2 test when returning to the UK, be aware that that's actually an on or before day 2 requirement, which means you can get tested straight after arriving at the airport on day 0. This will save you a trip to get tested close to your home, and now there's a requirement to isolate until your result comes through. It means you'll be free to get on with life the day after landing, rather than having to isolate for 3 or perhaps 4 days. So what do you think? Was that completely unacceptable for a business class product, or am I being a diva? Please leave me a comment with what you think. Please also like this video if you enjoyed it, and as always, subscribe if you're new. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again in the next one. Goodbye.